Hello and welcome to my latest blog. Today I'm going to talk about how to run workshops, and this one is titled Learning to Embrace the Blips, the highs and lows of running workshops and how problems are lessons in themselves. I've been in my current postdoc position for about 4.5 years now, which is considered a very long time in academia for one position. And I've run during that time countless workshops, both lab-based and virtual in the UK and also abroad. And I found that there's always something to keep you on your toes that you've never come across before. There's always a surprising number of things to consider that need addressing many months before the workshop itself. And if you've ever had the pleasure of running a scientific workshop, some of this might resonate with you. If this is entirely new to you, then also read on, and hopefully you can learn a bit from my reflections. If this is something that you want to if you're looking to get into, if you get stuck, I've also made some how to run a workshop documents and templates on our Pandora Global Health Network training resources hub page. And the link to that you can find in the actual written blog. So, number one, make sure you have all of the equipment and the reagents that you need well ahead of time. I've just come back from a trip to Lusaka, which is the capital of Zambia. I was only there for about a week and a half, but anyone looking at the suitcase I dragged to Heathrow might get the impression that I'm not a light traveller. Perhaps maybe I felt that I needed multiple outfit changes a day, or that I packed a whole host of inflatable items in case of a spare minute at the hotel pool. Sadly not. My suitcase was fit to bursting with items for the TB sequencing workshop that I was running in conjunction with HerpZ, which is one of our partner sites in Zambia. Everybody knows the feeling of entering a new laboratory or a workplace in general and having no clue where anything is, or even if that thing definitely exists there. It's always better to be safe than sorry, especially when you've got a room full of expectant faces wanting to learn new skills. 5 whole kilograms of my precious baggage allowance was dedicated solely to paper. I had to print off 20 copies of our protocol booklet. They were so thick, each one, that I could barely crunch a staple through it. I had to print out agendas, worksheets, evaluation forms, and certificates. I also had a whole set of pipettes, which were carefully wrapped up in my pajamas and my trousers so that they didn't get damaged. And I also had a bag devoted to wires. Nothing would be more awkward than finding out that my laptop wouldn't connect to the unidentified projector, and thus making the presentation I'd spent months perfecting completely useless. So I've amassed over time an assortment of HDMI cables of varying shapes, adapters, chargers, and even a camera and a mini tripod crammed in that bag, just in case. In my backpack, I carried 2 laptops, one for sequencing and one as my backup, and most importantly, my 2 precious MinION sequencing devices. They're not very big, sort of about hand size, but obviously they take up quite a lot of space. My back aches just walking to from the train to Terminal 4. All of the other laboratory reagents and equipment had been shipped to Zambia months ago, but shipping things in and out of other countries is often a bureaucratic mission in its own right, and something that very much needs to be thought about months in advance. My next point is make sure that you set the workshop dates well in advance so you have time to prepare. All of this is making sure you have time to prepare, really. If all of the people you're inviting to your workshop are in the same city as you, this isn't so much of a problem. If they're all in the same country, this is still not so bad. You just need to make sure that you or they, depending on who's booking it, have time to book their accommodation and their travel. Where it gets more complicated, though, is when you start to invite people from multiple countries to attend your workshop. And as I say, the crucial thing here is time. Firstly, I'd recommend creating an application form. I'd recommend requesting as much information as possible from your potential participants if you're going to be organising things like flights for them. Make sure you get their full names, and make sure you know which is their first name and which is their surname if you're booking flights. On one memorable occasion, when I was running a TB molecular diagnostic workshop, I had done that, and then 2 days before this person was due to fly out, somebody told me that their names were the wrong way around on the form, and that I therefore booked it the wrong way around. It did turn out to be fine in the end, but it could have been problematic. So just make sure you've got the right information. Also, consider the time it will take you to go through all the application forms and choose the right candidate. And sometimes this can take weeks, especially if you've got lots of different people all looking at the applications. Very much worth also checking that people fully meet your requirements as well by requesting as much information as possible on the application forms or CVs. We once ran a sequencing workshop here in the UK in English, and despite ticking the I speak English box on the form, one participant really didn't understand what was going on during the workshop. And it was just purely by chance that we happened to have a also French speaking person on the course as well. But having him translate the whole time for the other person was likely to be detrimental to both of their learning, and probably it would have been better had he been on a French version of the course rather than an English one. It can also take people months to get visas, so check in advance who you plan to invite, where they're coming from, and how long it will take for them to apply for a visa for the hosting country. You don't want people dropping out at the last minute because their passport is stuck in an embassy somewhere. Next up, communication is key. Luckily for me, I've had the fortune to work with some very talented scientists and administrators who've generally made running workshops a very smooth experience. But if you've got multiple people involved, it's definitely worth having regular meetings to ensure everyone's keeping on top of their tasks. And also make sure to write down lists of action points for everyone so they have a list of things to tick off as they go along. It's worth going into detail about the things you aren't managing yourself. Again, I once ran a workshop that required a biosafety level 3 laboratory to work with the organism in question, so it was TB. We had 20 people signed up for our workshop, so that's quite a lot to fit in one lab, especially a high security laboratory. So we decided to use a lower risk organism instead, so BCG, which is category or hazard group 2. I'd shipped it over, so they had the bacteria, and therefore the workshop could be held in theory entirely at biosafety level 2, which is of course much easier to control a large group when you have less restrictions. But when I arrived, I found that they had misunderstood what the organism I had sent was, and so they had set up the workshop to be in their Cat3 BSL3 laboratory. And to make matters worse, they hadn't actually told me that the BSL2 laboratory was 20 minutes drive away on the other side of the city, which massively impacted the timings of my whole workshop. So it's definitely worth making sure you've got all of that information to hand. Next up is try and prepare for the unexpected in the laboratory. This, of course, is almost impossible, and nothing can ever quite prepare you for setting up in a new lab for the first time. And even in your own lab, preparing practical sessions for multiple people with different skill sets can be really challenging. In Zambia, we managed to blow up the gel electrophoresis tank twice. We borrowed a nanodrop quantifier, and it simply just refused to use the software on our lab's new sequencing computer. We found that pipette tips didn't always fit the array of different pipette makes that we had. And it was also incredibly well air conditioned in the lab, and the two minines were really struggled to get to the necessary temperature. So we had to kind of give them a hug or sort of cram them in somebody's armpit to keep them warm. Another really important thing is making sure that your internet connection is good enough. The internet, if you need it, of course, really needs to be up to scratch. So are you recording your presentations? Are people joining online? Do you need to share data or information with your participants? Or do you need it to run crucial pieces of equipment? You'd probably better check the bandwidth in the lab that you're running it. In Tanzania, we were running a sequencing workshop, and the internet was so patchy that the participants weren't able to download any of the software or the files. So, unfortunately, rather than being able to practice the data analysis on their own computers, they had to make do with just watching us demonstrate, which is never as effective. MinION sequencing devices also need the internet to connect to the nanopore servers to start up a sequencing run, and they couldn't connect with such spotty internet connection. So we had people trying to find hotspots and IT people waving Ethernet cables and Wi-Fi dongles around, and it was absolute chaos. But after 6 attempts, we managed to get it started to our immense collective relief. In Lusaka, having learned from my experiences in Tanzania, we bought an internet bundle specifically for the workshop. And because of that, we managed to get pretty much everyone successfully base calling the data, so doing the data analysis, on both Macs and Windows laptops, and also start 3 sequencing runs simultaneously with no problems. It wasn't entirely without issues, though, as our shiny internet bundle firewalled 3 specific and very benign files that were needed to be downloaded in the data analysis software. And it took myself and John Tembo hours to get to the bottom of what it was doing. Also, Zoom failed to record some of my presentations properly, which meant I've spent hours and hours ever since trying to edit them to go on our Global Health Network pages. It's worth considering how much information you can really get through. This can be a tricky one to gauge, though. Everyone always takes longer than you'd think, and the more people you have attending, the more time you'll need to plan. Laboratory practical sessions tend to take longer than theoretical sessions generally, and I think the general rule is to include a third extra time for everything. And I think less really is more in this case. You'll probably find that going into greater detail about fewer subjects will be more beneficial for the participants. It's also worth considering the level that you're pitching it at and the background of your participants, and this is something you can identify when you request application forms. For instance, when running a sequencing workshop for wet lab-based scientists, they were very quick to grasp DNA extraction and sequencing preparation in the lab. But when it came to the bioinformatic analysis of the data, the first time we ran this version of the workshop, we assumed a similar level of understanding, or at least that they'd be able to grasp the basics and then sort of move on. But this was far too much for them in the time that we had. So the next workshop that I ran, I very much streamlined the data analysis section drastically. And this time around, everybody seemed much more comfortable, and we actually achieved far more. So in conclusion, despite or perhaps because of these issues, workshops that we've run have generally been fairly successful. Problems are always going to arise when pulling together an event with different disciplines and different groups. And at times it can be incredibly frustrating. And if it happens in front of participants, it can be very embarrassing, as if you don't know what you're doing. Whilst it can be a bit awkward, I've learned to embrace these blips. I've learned an awful lot more about running workshops and the techniques that I've been teaching when troubleshooting the things that go wrong. And I've learned to incorporate that into the training itself as well. Things won't be perfect when the participants take this away into their own settings, far from it, and they're likely to encounter all sorts of issues. Learning how to sort them out might well be one of the more useful parts of the lessons.